Welcome to the Occupational Safety Leadership Podcast, episode number 206 with Dr. Megan Tranter. Megan, when I looked over at your bio, you've had a lot of really awesome jobs, done a lot of traveling. Looks like you're from a totally separate continent, and everything too. Could you kind of tell folks a little bit about your background and why that you decided to jump off and do your own thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me, David. So I've been working in health and safety and environment my entire career, actually. I have this funny accent, which I always call out because others call it out. I've lived in the US for more than 20 years now, but I started my career back in Australia. And I started as a technical expert. So I was an industrial hygienist. My first job was actually the equivalent of an OSHA inspector. So you can imagine me, out there talking to different folks about legislative requirements. And I also specialized in rural safety. So I was out there
Ah,
talking to farmers and their families, as well as a few other things. Very interesting start to one's career. And then I spent about 4 years in academia teaching undergrad and master's degrees in Australia and Hong Kong. And then I reached a phase in my career where I thought, I need to get a real job. And so, yeah, it's funny, isn't it? How you sort of think, what is a real job and what isn't a real job. But I realized that, I was really good at the technical part of the profession. I was really good at advising people and letting them know what to do. But I wanted to experience what it was like to actually be an operator, set strategy within a business and execute. So that started my career in working for big companies. And you mentioned, that I have this interesting resume. And it's one that I'm really proud of because one of the things that I've really enjoyed about working for big brands or big companies is the overall impact and influence that you can have not only within your company, but also within the industry where you work, and then also broader in the world as well. And so that's brought me a lot of job satisfaction. And people probably hear me talking about health and safety in particular being a noble profession. And I
yes.
really feel that way about it because it's this type of profession where you are bringing so much goodness into the world. And even for people that you may never meet, and changes that you may never realize are going to come and happen in the future just by making some courageous decisions as a professional in these roles that we have, you can just make an enormous impact.
Yes, 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 yes. I like how you talked about it being a noble profession. So I've never met a safety person who got into safety to get bonuses and stock options and cash out when they were 50. That just doesn't seem to happen for us. So it's something that, at least for me, you have to have some passion, really want to help folks, because it really is a people-oriented occupation. Anybody can type in a cube and look at a manual and say, hey, I found these hazards and I found this. You still have to get out, communicate those hazards, talk to the folks out there. And I found that I wish I'd focused on the softer skills a little bit earlier in life, because at times I have to say the same message to the CEO, but then also the guy who's cleaning the trash can in the next half an hour. So, not that the message is going to be different, but there's different ways of getting that message across. So,
Well, one thing I've seen, and especially having worked in the profession so long, I've been in the profession more than 3 decades now. I don't say it all that often, but it's been a long time, and I'm sort of one of the OG safety people from Australia. The undergraduate degree that I studied all those years ago was the first undergraduate degree in health and safety that
oh,
Australia had ever offered. So I sort of have come in classically trained. And just to pick up on your point, I do think that to stay in the profession for a long time and to feel energized by it instead of the opposite of that, because it is draining sometimes with the type of work we're doing and the pushback that you get, and just a lot of things that come across your plate, or a lot of things that happen. But I do believe that to stay in the profession and to feel that energy and passion for it, you yourself need to have that personal drive as well.
Oh,
And I know
yes.
for myself, I mentioned I started very technical, which is exactly true. It actually took me a few years into my career before I started understanding what the work is about. And that takes, those type of jobs where you're meeting people and seeing the impact that you have to realize that, wow, by me being courageous and pushing on a certain point or adopting a different communication style and meeting someone halfway on a particular topic, then that will have these overall long-term impacts on someone else.
Oh, yes, 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 yes. And I know it's hard that we always want to go back and measure safety. And it's really hard when you get to a point that you're really doing well. You're not having accidents and injuries and chemical spills and things. So I have found that safety folks really kind of start to wonder, like, am I really making a difference, or are we just kind of at a point that we're just not having these things? So I have found folks who lose a little bit of motivation and interest because it takes such a long time to see it impact. And then when the impact's there, you have a hard time measuring that impact. You can just say, well, historically we did have these and now we don't, so I can see a change, but that takes time.
Yeah, one of the things I've found helpful, I often think about the saying for those who are parents, and we get told the days are long, but the years are short. And I often feel this way now because my children are young adults in their 20s. And you think back to those long days that you're spending and doing the work. And then it's often not until you think about your legacy or you reflect back on 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, and you realize that, wow, that particular initiative that I had suggested or the conversation that I had with a supervisor that then impacted the way that they thought about health and safety and impacted their visible felt leadership themselves. The conversation you had with the frontline employee who also, might have had a certain viewpoint about safety. You realize after time that all of those points, all of those things that you did added up over time and had this compound effect. And I think that's the thing maybe to look at as you get further along in your career is, yeah, it's important to think about the numbers and the metrics because also you often get measured on that. But there's this softer side as well, which is perhaps one that is more objective and less um, easy to quantify, but it's still one that you realize that you can have this incredible impact on both the company as well as on people.
Oh, yes, 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 yes. So when I was looking at the, I think just recently you kicked out is it a weekly or a monthly letter that you have?
Oh, I publish a newsletter every Tuesday, actually,
Okay.
and I'm focusing on different topics as they relate to leadership and especially for purpose-driven leaders, which includes safety leaders.
Mhm.
So I'd love if people would subscribe to it, but
Mm.
it's not the type of newsletter where I'm going to be talking about how to do noise sampling or how to do a risk assessment, but it's much more about how you can engage with people and make an impact and how you influence people also combined with a lot of the things we think about a lot as leaders, which is things like imposter syndrome or what does failure and risk taking look like in the professional capacity. So lots of different topics that hopefully, get people to think a bit differently about their career.
Yes, yes, yes. I have actually felt some imposter syndrome at some point, and it was really kind of an odd feeling that people were congratulating me for things, and I was like, do they really know that I had all this like anxiety and I missed a few steps and but when you think about it, you're never going to get a plan perfectly right. You can sit down and in hindsight and adjust it as you go, of course. But yeah, I have found that when you really ask folks, there's a lot of people who really have that imposter syndrome. Luckily, I only had it for a very short time, but some people really carry it for a very long time and have a hard time shaking it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think you're right. I think plenty of people have it and plenty of successful people have it as well. You sort of raised a point there, about doing things perfectly as
Mhm.
well. And one of the things I've found in safety is that for a long time, and I think it's changing a little bit now, but for a long time, we really were encouraged to do things very well, and you'd follow the hierarchy of control and, you understood that
Yeah,
these are the ways that you needed to do things. And because you were talking about people's lives and their well-being, it really was a little frowned upon, I think, to take risks. Whereas now there are different ways of taking risks that may not jeopardize someone's well-being or their safety, but just different ways of thinking about doing things. And so maybe that's this piece then that I can encourage safety professionals to think about if they are feeling imposter syndrome, which is that, not every single person, number one, has got it figured out. But number two, there's a lot of advantages in being courageous and taking risks. And so perhaps that's one of the ways to frame it is rather than framing it as that, you don't know what you're doing or you feel anxious about it, just frame it as an experiment. That's the
right,
latest thing that
right.
I'm doing is thinking about, well, this is an experiment. And just like you would have a hypothesis and a null hypothesis, if it works, then that's one answer. And if it doesn't work, then that's another answer, and you're just proving a hypothesis, correct or incorrect, and sort of taking the ego and the emotion out of it as well. That's what I found helpful.
Yeah, yeah. That is a really good way of looking at that whole thing, you know. So I do know a lot of safety professionals who really struggle with when I'm going to kick out a SOP or a training, it has to look good and it has to um, have the right colors and it's going to have the branding of the company and like all that's something, but let's focus on the content. And it's not going to be perfect. So maybe it's okay to skip a couple steps, but it's better to talk to the folks and get input from the folks who really have to use this thing, you know? So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
When I worked in tech and I worked in a big tech company, and also during the time that I worked in this big tech company, I spent 1 year actually not working in safety. I
Mhm,
worked as part of a tech company at a tech team
mhm.
and led some software engineers, product managers, UX designers, and so forth. And I think for me, one of the biggest learnings, especially in areas like tech, is that you build it and then you keep iterating on it and things break and you fix them and you keep moving forward. And I think that's a really healthy way to look at things. Now, certainly, safety is not code. With code, you wind
Right.
back the code, you fix the mistakes, and you roll it back out again. Nothing terrible usually is lost with that. But certainly, this philosophy and this approach of continually iterating and shipping. So again, in tech world, they talk a lot about needing to ship the product, meaning you need to ship the software and
Right.
you ship it and you send it out and then you get feedback on it and then you adjust and you improve and then you ship it out again. So maybe this is another framework that safety professionals can think about, from a different industry and a different profession. But I think one that's really healthy because it's basically saying constantly do things, constantly deliver things, and then take feedback, adjust, and then send it out again.
Right. Well, I think that some folks have a hard time with that feedback, and sometimes it's not the feedback they get, it's just literally any form of feedback because maybe in their life they've been beaten down or the feedback has been really awesome, but the project was still not good. So I think that some folks still kind of struggle with um, how do I ask for feedback and it's constructive and not somebody saying, I don't like it. Well, that's all. That's awesome, but you still haven't said how to fix it. You just said that you don't like it. So that I think that's actually really hard for some folks to even ask for that to get started.
Yeah, I've worked for a few companies where feedback was part of the culture. And I will confess that myself, as a bit of a reforming perfectionist, or let's call it a work in progress, that that when you first receive the feedback, you're quite affronted by it, and depending on the delivery of it. And some people are very skilled at giving feedback where it is tangible and it's results oriented and it's actually super helpful.
Mhm.
And then other times you receive feedback or what might be disguised as feedback, and it
Mhm.
doesn't quite feel like the intent was there. Let's just say that. But one of the things I've found really helpful is to think of feedback as neutral. So rather than thinking of feedback as positive or negative, if I think about it as neutral and as a data point,
Mhm,
then that
mhm.
helps me both receive it, so being open to receiving it, and then also deciding myself whether the feedback that's being given is relevant, actionable, and so forth. So, someone might say, that was such great work, you delivered that project so well. And it makes you feel good. You're like, oh, thank you, and you feel wonderful about it.
Yeah, right.
And then at the same time, someone might say, I know you tried really hard on that project, but it was late and over budget and, X, Y, and Z of everything else that went wrong with it. And then you feel really deflated. And so what I find is that if you can just take the feedback as neutral, don't get too excited when you perceive it to be positive feedback,
Mhm.
but equally don't get so devastated when it is improving feedback. And then it helps you stay balanced so that you can also keep moving forward. Because I think the other thing with feedback is it slows you down. So, especially when you get feedback that maybe you hadn't expected, or you're finding it quite difficult to receive and process that feedback, it then slows down your performance, how you can deliver what you set out to deliver, the way you interact with people, all because you're processing it for so long, then it impacts your performance as well. Now, I
Mhm.
say all this, but I think everyone is a work in progress and it's not always easy.
Mhm.
But I've found myself and also other brilliant people that I've worked with, those that can do that, receive it as data, are the ones that can then themselves choose which parts of the data are true to them and which parts they'll leave behind and then move forward on.
Right, 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 right. That's also a difficult aspect when somebody gives feedback and you d decide that you're still going to go a different way. They almost see it as an insult yeah, but I told you my feedback. I told you to change, you know.
Yeah.
So that could be really hard too. So not that the feedback is not awesome and great and all that and a data point, but we also have to go back and follow up with folks and say, hey, thanks a lot, but I've still decided to go this route or this way, or so that could be difficult for the safety person too.
Yeah, and also being clear on who's accountable for the decision and who's accountable for the delivery of the final output or the outcome. So not every piece of feedback has to be actioned,
Right,
and
right.
I know some people think that their feedback means it needs to be received and also actioned. But if one can be clear with the team and with the company and with the people giving feedback, how it will be received and what will be done with it, that it may be considered, but equally it may not be used. One thing I've found is by setting those guardrails up front, then it helps people to understand that, yes, I really appreciate and would like your feedback, but ultimately, I am the owner of the project, or I am the owner of the decision, or for a lot of safety people, they're not the owner. So they might say, the ops director, the operations director is the owner of this decision because it's their risk to manage.
Right.
So, there's different ways of thinking about it. But I've found that if you can have clarity with colleagues about who owns what they're responsible for, and be super upfront about what you're going to do with the feedback, then most people over time at least, can take that and say, okay, all right, I respect that. I get that.
Right, 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 right. I like what you said there about ownership of the risk then too,
Right.
because we can't, as safety professionals, we can't be everywhere. We can't supervise every single person. So we have to worry about how do we help people to make these really good decisions, help them to understand what the risk is, and is it something that they will tolerate the risk or not tolerate the risk, you know? So that can be difficult too, because some folks really believe that they really have to be there to help out. And given today's society, you can't be in all the locations and places. And so the operations people really have to own this risk out there.
Right. I often draw analogies to other functions in organizations. Let's say an HR department or finance. Let's use HR as the first example. HR may set out and explain to both employees and supervisors and leaders and executives what company expectations are for behavior, for example, or
Mhm.
for what the law requires, a myriad of things. How to give feedback might be another example there. But at the end of the day, it is the employee and their leader or supervisor that is accountable for ensuring the culture at that company is a certain culture. It's usually not HR's responsibility to do that, and I think about safety professionals perhaps a similar way. And it is something that we need to think about that we don't want to absolve ourselves of responsibility. We need to be professional and up to date with our technical expertise, have a great way of communicating with people and influencing people. But at the same time, understanding within the environment where we're operating, who owns the risk?
Mhm.
And, different businesses do think about it differently, by the way, as well, as you know. But I think that's the most important thing to understand as a safety professional. What does the business believe? Where does the business believe the risk is owned? And then the second part is what is the business's risk tolerance? And that's
Mhm.
one thing that I've found really important to understand because as a safety professional, you may have a certain bar or certain standards that you uphold and that you believe in. But if that is mismatched with the risk tolerance of the business that you're operating in, it can get a little bit tricky.
Oh yes, yes, yes. One thing that's helped out me is that I literally go and talk to them and ask those questions. Because
Yeah.
there's a lot of times where it's really not communicated, but they almost act like it's understood. Like I'll be the one, I'll make the decision and I need your help with the risk and all that, but they don't really almost map out what is and what's not acceptable. So at times it can be really hard to go back and just as bad as it sounds, how safe are you going to make it? You know?
Well, also, as a safety professional, if a safety professional is making recommendations on certain risk mitigation standards or certain policies or procedures, they're not the one implementing them.
Right.
And, this is one of the interesting things that I found when I took this 1 year where I wasn't working in safety and was working in a tech team,
Mhm.
how it feels for another function or another group to impose their rules on you when you're trying to meet business expectations, hit the business goals, be a fantastic leader, build a high performing team.
Mhm.
And so, one of the learnings I had out of that is that support functions like safety that collaborate with leaders and their team, and that there's a conversation about all of these topics, do much better than one who comes in, a safety professional who comes in and says, I know how to do this, and this is what you'll do.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think that a little bit of it is just every day, just us being just like like humans being humans. People don't want to be told what to do. They want to have a choice. They want to have input. They want to kind of think about their future. uh, nobody likes do it or else, because almost everybody takes the or else approach to it then.
Right, right,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah. I heard a guy say once, and I'm trying to think about so I don't butcher the saying. He said something like well, and of course it was a very very good thing. He said something like, a lot of safety guys just come in like seagulls and leave, but you're pretty cool about things. And I was like, huh, like seagulls? He was like, yeah, they just come in, poop on you, and just leave. All that they do is come in and say, you've done the following things wrong, fix it. I'll see you in 7 days, you know. And that is a strategy. That's probably not a very good strategy to get things done. Mhm.
I've also heard of that analogy as well.
Yeah.
And then, because
Mhm.
I've worked with thousands of different safety professionals, the most successful ones that I've seen are the ones that really can get along with anyone and they
Yes.
get to know the person and the team like really, really well.
Hmm.
And they are reasonable and they, you use the word human, they're
Yes.
human as well. And they work really hard to understand what the folks are going through so that they come to the table as problem solvers. And clearly, a seagull is not a problem solver. But,
Right.
I think the best safety professionals are those ones that are problem solvers and don't look that they are the person in charge, but they are there to work with others to solve problems to keep the business running.
Right. I used to say that I don't work for anybody, but I work with everybody,
Right.
you know? So, and I think that's reasonably accurate, even though I really do have a boss and somebody has to keep me in line too, of course, at the same time. So, Megan, this has been a great talk. We are bumping up on time. Could you take a couple seconds and let the audience know where they can find you and reach out to you?
Yeah, there's a couple of places you can find me. You can find me at megantranter.com. Also, if you're on LinkedIn, I'm really active on LinkedIn. I love posting there, and I'm posting content about how to increase or improve your impact and influence as a purpose-driven leader, which includes safety professionals. So you can hit me up on LinkedIn as well. And what I'm doing actually is helping purpose-driven leaders think about their career and the impact that they're having long term. And sometimes that looks like thinking about making a left or a right turn in one's career. And other times it's, realizing that one might be very happy in their current role, but how can they actually get some guidance on increasing the impact that they're having?
Mhm.
So I'm coaching some amazing people on these different elements that they're in their career at the moment.
Oh, very good, very good. I think that everybody needs some coaching, regardless of what your field is and how long that you've been doing it, because there's somebody out there who can just be that objective voice and can just help you out to look at issues and say, well, why don't we think about it as you've done on this and reframe it? Let's kind of think about it in a different way. And it's not a yes or a no or a good or a bad. It's just a data point. And then we'll gather up our data points and make our. So I think by having a coach that can really help folks out an awful lot out there.
Yeah,
So,
I've seen that as well. Yeah,
mhm. And with that, thank you so much. This is episode 206. We are complete. Thank you so much, Dr. Megan Tranter.
you're
Have a safe
welcome.
day.